This is going to be kind of less of talking at you and a little more interactive, a little less formal. My name is Kathleen Curry. I'm here to moderate the session on rural affairs. And we are really lucky to have a gal that's going to speak to us from Action 22. Sarah Blackhurst is here, and she's going to steal the show, I think. But I want to do a couple things before we get started, Sarah. First of all, I want to thank, ironically, Aurora Waters sponsoring the Rural Affairs Breakfast, and we thank you for that, Aurora. And we're going to have 45 minutes. We have to wrap it up by 8:15. Doug's going to come up a little bit later, and we want to have some more interactive dialogue on this topic, which is a fairly broad topic. Doug, I don't know where you are, but I want to pose a question for you all to just think about, and Sarah's going to do her presentation and also hopefully stimulate some dialogue. But this notion of rural Colorado, I asked myself this morning, what is rural Colorado? Really, what do we mean? Do we mean, that should be a premise for our thought process, I would think. We are talking about Summit County being a rural county, Saguache County, Mesa County, Yuma. So think about that. The other day we were in a meeting and somebody asked me, what's AG's position on an issue? And I thought, well, that's a hazardous question. How do you ever take and categorize all of agriculture with one response? It's the same thing with rural Colorado. Do you guys think the issues facing Summit County with I-70 traffic, for example, do you think those issues are on the top of the list for the Saguache County commissioners? No. So we have to find a way to diversify our communication strategy. What Doug asked me to do was focus in on communications and outreach for this session. So the concept here is, how do we navigate that given the diversity? So with that, Sarah Blackhurst is the CEO, President, Executive Director, top person at Action 22. She's going to talk to us for a little bit, and Sarah, however you want to do the format is great.
Are we on? Oh, perfect. Okay. So my name is Sarah Blackhurst. As she said, I am the CEO and president of Action 22, but I am wildly insecure about the way I smell. So you guys are making it worse. So would you do me a favor and just kind of stand up and move in a little bit closer? I know that you guys, have your stuff and you're sitting out there, but you're way out there. Darius Allen, I'm talking to you right now. Get up and move closer. Yeah, you hear me. You guys are all just kind of sitting there. I'll give you a second. Just kind of, can you move in a little bit closer? Yeah, but everybody move in a little bit closer. I know that you guys have been with each other for the last 3 days and you're probably sick of each other. I'm going to tell you just really quick as you guys are moving. I wanted to thank Doug and Kathleen. Doug, yeah, good job, Doug. So I was really, really touched and honored that Doug asked me to come and visit with you guys a little bit about rural engagement in the rural space. It's kind of a confusing topic for me because I don't look at it the same way other people do. And I think I have Paul Fanning. Are you here, Paul? Oh, hi, Paul. I think I have Paul Fanning to thank for this. Paul Fanning is just the cutest guy. And we were really, really sad. Last year I asked Paul if he would just kind of brief me on some water issues to catch me up, because when I started with Action 22 about 2.5 years ago, it was it was kind of in the weeds. I'm going to say it that way. it was kind of in the weeds, and we needed to figure out who we were and what we stood for and if we were relevant. So as a brand new director, the previous director, and she'd been gone for several years before I even came on, was Kathy Garcia. You guys might remember her. She did a really great job, but she went to work for Senator Gardner. And so Action 22 was a little bit of a turtle on its back. And unbeknownst to me when they brought me on was that they were giving me like 6 months. The board said, if she doesn't last 6 months, we're just going to shut the whole thing down. And so then I came in and I was like, are we even relevant? So, I mean, it was kind of a stupid move on my part. But one of the things is I went and found Paul Fanning, who'd been a faithful Action 22 advocate. I asked him if he could brief me on a few things, and he sat me down, and I went in, and he's so sweet and so cute, and he gave me about 500 pages of material to go home and do homework. And I told him, dude, I sleep with a teacher. I don't want to go home and do homework. But he insisted, and they said, oh, by the way, I'm leaving. I'm going to retire. And I was like, oh, you jerk. I need water, people. So that was kind of what we did, but that was a whole restructuring that Action 22 did over the next little bit. So I wanted to visit with you a little bit today, trying to stay on topic about about rural engagement. And so I want to know, just a show of hands really quick, if you are, the organization you're with, if you have changed a strategy or made this a priority list or anything like that in the last rural engagement in the last 2 years? Is this something you're focusing on? Okay, so nobody cares about this. Okay, this is actually great. So you have a few people over here. The guys in the way back that didn't move. They're raising their hands. I see Chris back there. So Chris, you don't count because you've always done that. So that doesn't count. If you've been thinking about having a thoughtful, or you've been thinking about having a conversation about improving your rural engagement, okay, great. So nobody. They're like, yeah, no, not really. Okay. Oh, 3. Well, we've got 3 right here. Oh, I forgot the people behind me. So they're saying yes, that they're doing that. So if you are kind of thinking along that line, and I'll get back to this in just a minute. I jump around a lot. I'm one of those people. So think about that for just a second and put yourself in the why. So why you're thinking about doing that, or why you haven't been thinking about doing that. But just keep it to yourself. I'll call on people in a minute. So for just a second, everybody's got their coffee now and they've had a little sip. Everybody take a second to sip your coffee, because I'm going to make you move here in a minute. If you live in a rural community, will you stand up and just stay standing? Would you stand up? If you live in a rural community, stand up. All right. And stay standing. If in your professional capacity you have dealings in rural communities, stand up. If you have family that lives in rural communities, stand up. Okay? If you have enjoyed any kind of recreation in the last year in a rural community, stand up. If anything essential that you enjoy, like, I don't know, water or energy or food, comes from, if you've consumed anything in the last 2 or 3 days that has come from a rural Colorado, would you stand up? All right. Look around for just a second, and everybody point to the person that's not standing up. If you're a Coloradoan, sit down. So you guys don't need to really think or do anything to increase your rural engagement, because look around, you're already rural. So let's talk a little bit about that rural engagement and why this seems to be the buzz term, the cool new thing all the cool kids are doing. Like you're running for office, so we're going to talk about rural engagement. And what the heck does that even mean? So here's what I want you to think. I asked you a second ago about the why on the rural engagement. If whatever you're thinking about, I hope that my comments today will make you rethink your strategy on that. Because look around, everybody that's actually doing anything is rural already. You've got that leadership and you're doing that. So I'm going to pose a few thoughts to you, and it's going to be discussion. Yell things out at me. I'm good with that. But I want you to rethink what your strategy is on that, because you're in a really good position, because everybody who is in power is trying to get at you. Like, you're the hot chick at the prom, right? So think about it from that way and own that, maybe for the first time in a really long time. And I don't really care why, but I don't want your why to be because it's the right thing to do. I want your why to be self-serving. I want your why to be because you're taking care of and you're increasing the prosperity of Coloradoans and honestly the whole nation as a whole. So let's talk about, I have a really embarrassing story for you. Let's talk a little bit about the what on engagement. What does that even mean? So last week, and you probably already heard about it, so there's 3 organizations that we work with, Action 22, Club 20, and Pro 15. Besides Chris back there, do you guys know Action 22, Club 20, and Pro 15? Yes? Yes? Okay. All right. So was anybody with us at Voices is there anybody here that was with us at Voices last week? Okay. Well, you guys, if you miss it again next year, I'll find you and beat you. So we get together and we talk about our shared issues and some of the things. We have really great engagement with elected officials and all that sort of thing. I had this really great, interesting and rather embarrassing thing happen to me. So it's 3 days, it's like this. Where Doug's at, I was home. It was like 9:30 at night. I was waiting for my husband to come home. He was broadcasting down in Alamosa. And I posted this really sweet thing that my cousin had posted on about the event. And I thought it was just really sweet. And I posted on my personal one. And a little bit later, this person that I actually know pretty well started saying some things on my Facebook about, and it was just bizarre. Like, the things he was saying were really bizarre. Now, this is a man that I've known for years and years. I had been at Farm Bureau a few weeks earlier, and we sat together at the breakfast at the devotional. Him and his wife. We had a moment about my dad. My dad had died. It'll be a year ago on next month. And so, we had this little moment because he knew my dad and all this sort of thing. So here's this person, and he's saying these sort of bizarre, but like, well, who chose you to represent us? And this isn't rural, and this event wasn't about rural issues, and like all this other stuff. And I was like, this is so bizarre. So I'm like writing back. It's like, John, are you okay? Like, what's going on with you? And he kept up with all these things. And then he goes on the Action 22 one, and he says something about Action 22 stealing ag water or something. And I was just like, this is so crazy. And then I was like, oh, you know what? And he's like, everybody should know the deception. I'm like, you're right. Everybody go see what Action 22 is about. And I left it, and I was like, man, I am so clever. A friend of ours went, I don't know who this guy is, but she's like, just delete it and move on. And I'm like, I really did that, right? I really engaged. And I'm like, man, I don't know. I was trying to like put it all away, and I was like, yeah, delete it. And I just deleted the whole thing, and it was no big deal. And I had this urge to watch Lord of the Rings, and I'm sitting there, and I'm sort of thinking this, and I'm scrolling through my Amazon to pull up Lord of the Rings, and I'm like, I got trolled. And it wasn't even a very good troll. It was like he was reading the Trolling for Dummies thing. It was like he was trying out some, and I was like, I was like, oh, I got trolled. I'm a public figure. I got trolled. I am so excited. Nobody's ever cared about me enough to like troll anything I've ever done. Like, I'm not that important. So I call my husband. I'm like, okay, guess what? I got trolled. He's like, what? I go, I got trolled. And he's coming back. He's on the road. He's driving. He's like, what do you mean you got trolled? And I tell him this story and how clever I was, and he was super annoyed with me. So I call my son, the person that thinks like me, and I'm like, guess what? And he's 22 years old, right? And I'm like, guess what? I got trolled. And he goes, and he's like, what do you mean you got trolled? That's the dumbest thing, Mom. You're so dumb. And I was like, but this guy, and he's like, you engaged with him? And I was like, well, yeah, I know him and blah, blah, blah. And, I couldn't figure out what's going on. And my son, in no uncertain terms, said, he goes, if you ever, and he got like really serious. He's on the phone. He's like, if I ever see you engaging politically on any social media ever again. Like he says it to me in the same way that like when he was in high school and I was like, if you ever get a girl pregnant, I better never. Same kind of thing, right? So he goes, if you ever engage politically with anybody on social media, and I was like, damn it. This is what engagement looks like, right? This is what passes for engagement nowadays. So I had to rethink my whole thing. And by the way, can I just say how brilliant it is that I have a 22-year-old as my political advisor? Like, that's smart, right? And he's right. He's brilliant politically. But it really made me stop and think what that engagement should look like. I'm going to talk a little bit about our friend Phil Weiser for a second. So there's this super nerdy, skinny dude, and he comes in a couple years ago, and he's running for office, and I know he's running for office, but he wants to sit down and have conversations with us. Now, listen, he is so left, he's almost right again, right? He's so left. And so I'm sort of entertaining him because I get this all the time. But he sits down and he has conversations and he asks a lot of questions. Phil Weiser is a weird, great, fantastic guy. I absolutely love him. I'm part of his fan club. But here's why. When you are in a position like I am, you have a lot of people and they're like, we're going to do this whole rural engagement thing because they're secretly saying we're terrified because it's the rural community that put Trump in and we just don't know what to do about this. That's really what they're saying. But they're like, we're going to do this for you. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this for you. And you're going, right? You're like, okay. Did you stop to ask what it was that I actually needed you to do? And I'm going to talk in a second about why we do that same thing. That sort of, it's the mansplaining thing, but it's like the rural-splaining thing. What you really need is this. Phil didn't do that. Phil came in and he asked. He has followed up on every single thing that we've asked him to do, and he's come up with some different things, but he has stuck with, he's out there, he shows up to everything, he puts the team in place, but he stopped and asked the questions. So this is what I do with my board on this. We were really frustrated with just sort of the playbook, right? How we do things. We do the same thing over and over again, expecting the different result. And that's probably why we needed to rethink if we were even relevant. So I posed 2 questions. But the big one was, are we really action or are we not really action? If we're really action, let's actually do something. So 2.5 years later, we've discovered that, by the way, only about 40% of the stuff that we actually do, the actual lifting that we do, is legislative. And I'll tell you why we're doing it a little bit different on that aspect of it in a second. But here's the questions I ask. It used to be 2, but now I'm asking 3. So the first, I'll tell you the one that I've added. I just assumed, and you know what assuming does, it makes an ass of you and me. I just assumed that everybody already knew the answer to this question or they wouldn't be there. But that's not the case. So for the first question is this. Before we do anything, we ask ourselves, who are we serving? So think about that for a second. When you are dealing with anybody, do you ask that question in your head? Who are they serving? So who as leadership are you serving? Number 2, what matters most to those we serve? We've talked a lot about fiscal policy, right? But are we asking the question on changing any fiscal policy, what matters most to you? Has anybody asked you that? What matters most? If somebody asks me that, I high five them. I'm like, that is the best question ever. They don't like the answer I'm going to give them, but I totally respect that they had the emotional and mental maturity to ask me that question. And the third question we ask is, what does our community need from us? Whoever we say we're serving, that's our community, by the way. And what does our community need from us? If we can't answer those three questions, we don't do it. If it doesn't drive unity and purpose and all that sort of thing, if we can't actually do something, we don't do it. We are spread, as rural communities, we are spread too thin. We have too many hats. Really quick, if you serve on something besides water board, if you serve in any kind of official leadership capacity, will you raise your hand? Right? Okay. The rest of you, you absolutely do. You need to acknowledge that you're absolutely doing it. You wouldn't be here if you're not doing that. You are leadership in all kinds of areas. We don't have the luxury to screw around anymore. So let me talk really quick about our legislative, and then we can talk a little bit more and ask some more questions. So we asked, there's not a discussion that I have with anybody in Southern Colorado that doesn't involve healthcare, energy, or water. And so we took that and we said, what can we actually do? Who are we serving? Da, 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 da. Here's what we found on water. Because Action 22 is this tiny little organization. We can't do a whole lot. I mean, we're not in the decision making. But this is what we discovered when we asked what our community needs from us. The big thing, and this is our big push for this year, is water. This is what Action 22 is going to do on water. We learned that a lot of our elected officials on all levels have tremendous decision-making responsibilities, really, and on water specifically. So, but a whole lot of other things. Here's the problem. Because they wear so many hats, they're asked to make decisions on stuff that they really don't know. They're not going to go into Paul Fanning and say, and Paul give them like 6 weeks worth of reading material. They're not going to get through that. They're not going to do that. So what we're going to do, our efforts are to get that education piece. So we started looking at people who are really good at just the 101, the basics. I call him the water Yoda. I don't know if he's in here today. We love James Eklund. James Eklund does a great presentation on water. So every single thing that we do, every single event that we do, we ask James Eklund, and guess what? He shows up, and he gives that whole thing. That's what we can actually do. So I'm going to talk one last bit about, I'm going to probably run over just a couple minutes. Is that okay? Okay. So that's the what, and sort of I'm going to get into I got into the little bit what that should look like, and then sort of the how, just really quickly. Here's what we learned with Action 22, and let me tell you, I've got this really great board of directors. They're smart and they're funny. And they're all about their communities, and we all have, we're all hyperactive ADD. My executive team is all hyperactive ADD. If you guys know, the chairman of our board, my executive team is 5. The chairman of the board is, and you guys probably don't know him, but Mike Patterson, he is the city manager for Florence. And he is high energy. He runs around. Rick Klein, the city manager. Does anybody know Rick Klein, the city manager? So Rick Klein survives on sunshine and sugar, and he is the most hyperactive person ever. Really, really high energy. We've got Ashley Valdez from Excel Energy, Kevin Wilkins from, this is just my executive team, Kevin Wilkins from the San Luis Valley Economic Resource Development Group. I said that wrong. And then we have Chad Vorthman from Farm Bureau, and that's what my board of directors are. And what they said is we don't have to do this the same as everybody else. In fact, there's no reason to duplicate effort. Let's do it a little bit different. So kids, you guys have kids? Who has kids? Everybody has kids, grandkids, all that? Okay, so here's the other thing, right? So we looked at how we are with our legislators. And by the way, we have really, really great relationships with our legislators and with our elected officials. So they come to us and say, what is it that your priorities are? I mean, we have 2 meetings scheduled with them every year, and they come to us. And these are the Action 22 folks, so it's Leroy Garcia and stuff. And we sit down and we talk about a few things, and then they text me all through the session, and, where are you guys at on this? We've done that, a really great job on that. Here's the thing. when your kid comes to you and they're like, they're like the Nemo, they're, on that movie, Finding Nemo, it's mine, 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 mine. So think about that if you're in that position and you're a legislator and everybody's coming to you and they say, here's the problem, 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 here's the problem. You quit hearing things, right? We quit doing that. We look at a problem and we say, is this a legislative thing? Is this something we actually need them to do? Is this something that they actually can do? We've put too much on them to do that, because here's what we do, right? We say, here's the problem, and we don't finish the sentence. So we have, here's the problem. Instead, we say, here's what we need you to do. This is what we need you to do. By the way, they love that. Now, it's a little bit of a slippery slope from a political perspective, because if it goes wrong, they're like, well, Action 22 told us to do it this way. I'm okay with that. Honestly, we're okay with that, because we did something. But we didn't stop and say with our legislators, here's the problem, and then we're mad because we don't like the way they solve the problem. And by the way, they know they're mad so that they don't talk to us about things, so they don't go, where are you at with things? I think we don't treat legislators and elected officials like who they are. They're our employees. You wouldn't do that to your employee. You wouldn't go, here's the problem, and then give them nothing to solve the problem with. You wouldn't do that to them, right? And so we do it a little bit different. And by the way, we say on our website we're nonpartisan. We are more than nonpartisan. We are anti-partisan, because it screws everything up. Every time that happens, every time we assign a party to something, you just killed it. You just made it die. And it wasn't like it was brutal death, right? So we don't do that. We're anti-partisan. And so we ask the question of the people that we're asking to make these decisions, who do you serve? What matters most to us, because you're serving us, right? And what do we need from you? And we tell them that. So as far as the engagement piece goes, I hope that you sort of rethink what your approach is on this and what your responsibility is. You're going to have to pick up. We can't rely on these decision makers anymore. You have to have the responsibility side of that. So with that, I'll just...
All right, thank you. So that was definitely not what I thought it was going to be. I thought you were going to tell us that, okay, Facebook works, but Twitter doesn't, and you should go talk to Rotary clubs, but that doesn't really work for us. I thought you were going to tell us how to do outreach, and instead you posed some really good questions for us to consider. Who is our audience? Who are we trying to communicate to? Before we even talk about the hows, I wanted to also make a point about the legislative thing. You're right on. They want to help. But if you noticed yesterday, if any of you went to the legislative breakfast, which I imagine most of us did, there's 20 water bills on the docket. I know compared to healthcare and education, that's nothing. But 20 is a lot, you guys. Right now, that's my count. Some of them are bigger than others. Some of them have more of an impact than others. I don't know how they got drafted, to be honest with you. If the members that are running them did it in a vacuum, did they do it because one person came to them and said, we've got an issue? Or are they, and usually they're trying to solve a problem. They really are. They mean well. So we have to think about, as an organization, how to help them with this process, and I couldn't agree more that just bringing them a problem leaves the door open to them creating a solution that then we turn around and say, that doesn't work, especially at state affairs with a lot of attorneys who definitely find the problems. So we're gonna turn this over, I think, Doug, to connect this to the direction that Water Congress itself is headed. Does that sound like a good segue?
That's it.
Okay.
Yep.